Today we're going to be exploring implementation and integrations with Coursedog. We're going to talk a lot about how Coursedog implements and integrates with its clients, but we're also going to talk about the broader picture of different strategies in higher education, and hopefully have a valuable discussion that you can bring home to your campus, whether with Coursedog or whether during your own implementations. So the way this is going to be structured, we'll start with introductions. We'll talk a little bit about the functional onboarding and how that really works and some best practices on the client side. Then we'll talk a little bit about SIS and SSO integrations, and then we'll open it up to live Q&A, although you're more than welcome to submit questions during our presentation. Without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Nick to do an introduction.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Justin. My name is Nick Diao. I've been the co-founder and CTO. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Coursedog, and I specifically work on the technical side of our projects in our product, and I help take point on a lot of our integrations. So really looking forward to having this opportunity to kind of dive deeper into the details and how those implementations and integrations end up looking. Back to you, Justin.
Awesome. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Justin Wenig. I'm CEO and co-founder of Coursedog. I frequently work on the functional side of implementations with our clients. That's helping them get trained on the product, coming onto campus to speak with folks and understand their challenges. And it's really an honor to be here with you today. Awesome. So quick background about Coursedog. Coursedog offers class schedule planning, curriculum planning, catalog publishing, and event scheduling solutions. Right now we work with about 45 universities, big schools like University of Montana or Columbia or SUNY institutions, and lots of small schools like Laguna College as well. If you're interested in learning about Coursedog, we have lots of case studies on our website, clients that have switched over from other platforms that they were using for these services. So I'd highly suggest that you take a look, and we'll, obviously you'll have my email at the end of this. So if you have any additional questions about Coursedog, you're more than welcome to ask them. So we're going to get started by talking about kickoffs and how to run and what it looks like at Coursedog, and more generally, how to run an effective implementation kickoff. So this usually starts with most third-party integrations, just like with Coursedog, with a kickoff meeting. On our end, we will send, it's usually the partner's responsibility to send over an agenda for this meeting, to specify who is going to be included on the meeting. But to run a really good kickoff meeting, there's a lot of research on customer success and also on the client side that suggests that really digging into a couple of key things can make for a good kickoff. One of them is scope. So for those of you that have been involved with projects, you may know that sometimes what you think you're buying is not what you actually bought. So we highly suggest, and what we always do is we make a grid, and we literally will take out a pencil and a piece of paper, and we'll show it on the screen, and we'll say, this is what's in scope, and this is what's out of scope. And we try to go and dig into the items that are the ones that are the most potentially sensitive or that may cause confusion for the client, so that you're aware of exactly what it is that we're going to be covering. We also talk about functional requirements. How long is this going to take on your side? For us, an average implementation on the functional side might take about 40 hours. On the technical side, similar to that. Luckily, because we have a lot of built integrations now, that number, it hopefully doesn't take up as much of your time. Obviously, at a bigger campus, it might be a lot more. It could be hundreds of hours at a massive campus, or if you're the full-time person in charge of administering Coursedog. So good kickoffs, we think, include really in-depth discussion about scope, really in-depth discussion about time, about what the time commitments are. And last but not least, it really involves a discussion of key performance indicators. So, a lot of people come into kickoff meetings and they say, they remember the product really well. They know certain features. They say, our goal is to be able to make section assignments that have rule enforcement. And I always ask, well, why is that, right? And then they say, oh, it's because, our faculty are annoying and they all say they want to teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then I say, well, why is that a problem? And what ends up happening is you can really dig down on a KPI. And I really advise, before you implement any product to know or to have a good sense of what are your goals. Is it a 10% increase in space utilization? Is it to free up 200 hours for your staff? Is it to build better schedules so that you can increase graduation rates for students? And all these things are things that Coursedog do. But if you don't know what your KPIs are when you go into your kickoff, that's a problem, because you run the risk, you implement the software and you got a friendly looking guy like me that likes it, but if it doesn't get you results, and if it's not driving value for your students, then why did you go through this whole project? So I think it's really important to have KPIs so that you can hold the vendor accountable and yourselves accountable for the performance in the project. So right after the kickoff, once we've defined our scope, what the time commitment's going to be, and then really digging into what are our goals for this project, we immediately go toward talking about data. So for those of you that well know, most projects get derailed because of data. Integrations don't work. Data doesn't show up in the right format. Data is the limiting factor to go live, right? If you had all the data in there, usually it doesn't take too long to functionally set things up, although obviously there are some politics involved. But what I'd love to do is to hand it over to my co-founder, Nick, who can speak a little bit about the process of thinking about data during the integration and how Coursedog facilitates this through the best practice known as data workbooking.
Absolutely. Thanks, Justin. And Justin, do you want to pull up an example of a data workbook that we can show all the folks who are in the meeting?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So as Justin mentioned, data is a critical component for these integrations, both because for the Coursedog system to function, or really any third-party system to function, it often needs to pull data from the SIS or other systems of record on campus into another system. And these can present quite a few challenges, both on the IT and functional side. How is the data stored? Is it in certain tables or databases? And then also on the functional side, that can stem from, what does this field mean? Can this be true or false? What are the allowed options for this field? So what we do is, before any technical work is actually started on the integration, we go through a robust data workbooking process, which is the industry best practice to align expectations and really understand what are the data needs to successfully launch an implementation with Coursedog. And the way this works is that it goes into the weeds for every single field we have in Coursedog. So there are quite a few. These data workbooks are pretty big and they can look daunting at first sight, but we like to tackle them field by field, and we slowly go through them. We book a few back-to-back sessions, and then in a week we go through the whole data workbook, and it's an immensely valuable exercise. So most of you might be wondering, what is the benefit of us doing these data workbooks? What information are we trying to capture? And so it's really the following critical items that these sessions allow us to capture. So one is, we get to understand 4 different pieces of data if there's different business processes or restrictions that we need to be aware about. For example, certain rooms in your SIS might not be allowed for class scheduling. And then we now know, hey, we should filter out these rooms because they aren't used for this scheduling process. And that's something that we need to take into account during the data integration. The second item is invalid data and default values. With any institution, with any system of record that's been around for a while, there might be some invalid or outdated data, and it helps us to know how to capture that. For example, if we see an instructor whose date of birth says 1900, or a term that starts in the 1800s, which we have seen, it tells us that, hey, that's not a real term, that's not a real instructor, this might be bad data, and we should filter that out. And that really helps us ensure that everything you do see in Coursedog is incredibly accurate and reflective of the information that you want to work with, while pushing away all the bad information that we don't want to see. Thirdly, what this helps us define is a system of record for all disparate data points. And this goes a little bit more on the weeds on the technical side. But when we move information from the SIS into Coursedog or into any third-party system, we any kind of individual on the data side will ask which system owns this data. If we have a section that says section type is lab, is that owned in our SIS or is that owned in Coursedog? And what happens if there's a discrepancy? What happens if those data values don't line up? Which one should we trust and why? And so that really helps us say that, hey, for these fields, the SIS is the system of record. This is the de facto source of truth. And then we take that and incorporate it into our system and into our integration pipeline. For other fields, they might not even exist in the SIS. There might be some really custom fields that Coursedog allows you to have to provide additional functionality during some scheduling processes that might not exist out of box in your SIS. And we can say, don't worry, the SIS might not be able to handle it, but we certainly can. And we'll just mark this and say, Coursedog will be the system of record and the source of truth for this field. And so the fourth kind of key thing that we do get out of these data workbooks is data samples. So everyone stores data potentially differently, and there's a large variety of ways to do that across different databases and systems. So it's really important for us to say, hey, when you store the dates, how are the dates formatted? How are the times formatted? What do the emails look like? What do the IDs look like? And this really helps us see that what information looks like in your system and really gives us a sneak peek. It opens a window to say, hey, this is what information looks like in the SIS or in these other systems. Now our team can take this information and figure out what is the best pipeline to get this information formatted into the Coursedog data structures and then allow it to propagate efficiently and immediately into our end production system.
Awesome. That and I want to give one functional example for all us registrars and project managers out in the crowd. I want to give one functional example of why this is really effective. Many clients that come to Coursedog are on either a separate event or on some sort of separate event scheduling or class scheduling platform. So perhaps you're on at Astra, which we've taken many clients off of. Maybe you're on CollegeNet, and so sometimes you have some of this data filled out in your system, and you might come up with a concept of the way that things work based on your existing frame of reference. So here's an example. We have a client who was using a homegrown event system. And to them, event type meant something totally different than what it does in Coursedog. In Coursedog, if I show an event type is really an organizational unit that allows us to route to the relevant form for someone to fill out. So for example, an event type might, as a good example, some event types might be a sporting event or an alumni event or a speaker event. But at this campus, they had hundreds of event types. There was luncheons and there was dinner-ins and there was double dinner-ins, and it was a lot. And so when we showed them that, well, if you want to do it that way, then you're going to have a drop down that's going to have 500 different options when you go and select from your forms, it quickly helped us with avoiding something that would have really caused a negative impact on our integration. Because if we just take whatever is your existing frame of mind, oh, this is an event type, that's an event type, without explaining it to you and walking through these data workbooks step by step, you might end up making a bad decision about how our integration should work, and we might have to go back and do a lot of work. So these things are a pain. They're technical, they require a lot of upfront work. So we do provide some initial, for example, if you're a PeopleSoft school, we'll show you some examples. If you're a banner school, we'll try to show you an example. But we always want to have our clients go through this because it really saves a lot of time and effort down the line and makes sure everyone knows what this integration actually does. Awesome. Any questions from folks who are in the crowd, feel free to submit them through the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom. While I will continue to talk about what this implementation looks like. So After the process of data workbooking, so data workbooking really creates the data contract for our student information system or CSV or however we're going to do this integration. And we'll talk about what that integration, how that works technically in a second. But in a chronological order, the next thing that we normally do is collaborate with a client on some sort of timeline and game plan for the project. So it's really, clients always say, and schools always say, well, how long is this project going to take? Is it going to take 8 weeks? Is it going to take 12 weeks? And you know, that's all. I've never made a sale. Maybe it would be funny if I said I never made a sale in my life, but that's not the truth. I think our sales team might be laughing at that, who's on the conference, but which is partially true. But you know, there's never been a client I've worked with prior to signing a contract who didn't ask about the functional timeline. Because why would you work with a vendor without knowing how long something takes? And the truth is, it's really hard to know what your functional timeline is going to be if you might have a different version of event type in your head than exists in Coursedog. It might be really hard if your data is in a bunch of different sources. If you've got data in some custom system and you've got in another SIS and your SIS is homegrown and whatever, it can be really challenging. So we always give our clients a general estimate up front, but we don't deliver any sort of timeline that has, you know, fixed dates until we've really gone deep into those data workbooks and the data side of things. Because the limiting factor, as I'm sure many of you know, to any project is the quality of its data. Setting up Coursedog is actually really easy. I could send you help documentation. You could set it up in one day. Obviously there's politics, but data is the hard part. And so what we do after this data workbooking is we come to the client and we say, hey, here is our game plan. This is what it's going to look like. These are the different things that we're going to need to do in this project. This is the things that are going to happen on events or scheduling or even, you know, on the catalog. And you're able to see it broken out by, you know, different types of high-level tasks, what's up next. And you may have a dedicated project manager to help you with managing that. You can see the teams that are going to be required for this and the work streams. And this will really help with the process of you understanding what it is that needs to be done, and for us to have an upfront conversation about, hey, when's our proposed go live date? Is this realistic? You know, how much do we have to get done? Who's going to do it? And getting that all out up front so that we can just go through each task and boom, 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 knock them out. So the last part of this is really giving the client Sandbox access. So most Coursedog partners, within about a week or two of signing the contract, will have a Sandbox environment. For those of you that are interested in that are looking at the Coursedog solution, we definitely advise getting a Sandbox early on in the conversation. Even during our sales, we're more than happy to provide you with a Sandbox, although it may not be fully set up. But the awesome thing about this is that once you have your Sandbox, you're going to have access to all of our internal tools. So what we're really going to do is we're going to walk you through our end-to-end support process first, and then you'll have the ability to walk through the Sandbox. So Coursedog support works in a couple of different ways. The first is that we have a help center which contains all of our product documentation and onboarding materials, and that really basically outlines everything that you need to know about Coursedog. Obviously, you may have a product consultant or you may have someone that helps you with the project, but it's really helpful because you will always have reference documentation on your product. Coursedog also does something that's pretty unique, which is we totally open source what our product roadmap is and actually allow you to make feature suggestions and recommendations about the direction of the product. So for those of you that are at a bigger institution, some of the bigger institutions that we work with, you may be on this all the time. This may be your best friend. But we actually have something called Canny, which you're welcome to check out. And it shows all of our warts and acne and all of the things that I guess we're not good at right now. But this is the place where you can actually submit any types of feature requests, any types of problems with the platform that you would like to see resolved via updating a new feature. And it also allows you to really monitor all the planned things that Coursedog is working on. So things you could see here, like internal comments on requests and annual salary field, these are all things that we're planning, and these are all the things that we have in progress. And so I would encourage you to go through, look at all the feature requests that folks have out. You'll see that you'll actually be able to see what other people are voting on. So you can actually sort by this, and you could say, oh, what's the one, this one has 7 events or 7 upvotes, and then you can upvote that on yourself, on your end. And you'll actually receive emails as this goes down the chain. And when it's automatically pushed to your production environment, you'll have the ability to see that as well. So I'm going to now turn it over to Nick, and I'll answer the question in a second, but I know Nick has to hop off at 2:30, and I want him to talk about SIS and SSO integrations really quickly. I'll give it to you, Nick.
Thanks, Justin. So a big question we get asked a lot is, what is the process by which we connect Coursedog to the SIS, and we connect users in Coursedog to the SSO system being used at the school? So first start with SIS. So we push forth the current best practice for moving data across the web, which is to use HTTPS web services, otherwise known as APIs. And this is something that some institutions might have out of the box, but others might not. So not to worry, what we do if an institution does not have readily available web services for us to be able to extract data out of their system and then also batch update if necessary, is we begin a conversation with your IT team to start discussing what are the fields and the tables that we might need access to, what is the correct firewall permissions for us to open up, and then we work with your team on actually deploying scripts into your SIS that will allow us, and just securely us, to make direct database queries that then get returned to us as a web service API, and then we call those APIs on a specified cadence, usually nightly, to do nightly batch integrations. And once this gets set up, it's a fairly straightforward process. We say, hey, we're gonna go grab all the rooms tonight, and then we're gonna look at the rooms in our system, and we're gonna make sure that the IDs line up and that there's no data discrepancies. And if there are any discrepancies, any merge conflicts as we describe them, we would automatically alert any individuals on the IT team to say, hey, it looks like there's some data mismatch between our 2 systems. Can you help us investigate what might be the source of truth here? Fantastic.
Awesome.
So I want to pause here before going to SSO, because I know often SIS integrations do raise a lot of questions.
Awesome. And I think we do have some questions coming in, so I want to send them your way right now, Nick. The first one that it looks like we got, I just want to quickly answer this one that was from before. Actually, I'll answer that in a second about the Sandbox. But one question we have coming in, Nick, is could you talk me through a little bit about what from an IT perspective or on the side of the institution, what do the expectations usually look like in terms of what they need to do in order to use Coursedog's integration?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Justin. So usually we will require just 1 DBA to work with us. And this is an aggregate, maybe 20 hours over the course of the integration. And someone who can just be there to answer any questions specifically about any customizations that might have occurred at the SIS level, and any answers about the system setup, what database version, and how the data is stored. Usually if there's anything that might add on a little time to our integration process, it's just if there have been any SIS customizations, usually at the database level, and having a DBA who can help us navigate those customizations and adjust our integration pipeline is very, very instrumental in moving these integrations up as quickly as possible.
Awesome, that's super helpful. And what if a client, for example, I get another question that's coming through here is, what if, for example, I'm on a custom version of Banner or PeopleSoft, or what if there are like certain fields that I don't want flowing through to Coursedog because maybe I want Coursedog to own those fields? How does that affect, or how might that impact? Is that something that Coursedog can accommodate, or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, Justin. So it's really important for us to understand the source of truth of all fields and to say, hey, if there are new fields in Banner, custom fields in Banner. Should they come over to Coursedog? Should they not? If they do come over to Coursedog, who owns them? If you edit them in Coursedog, do they go back to Banner or do they stay in Coursedog? And this is all information that we will really readily map out and determine in the data workbooking session before we even step foot during the integration process. So once we start speaking to the DBA, once we start setting up our integration, we have specific and precise knowledge on every field in your system that should be brought over to Coursedog and exactly what system should own that field when changes are made.
And then last question, Nick, that we have coming through here, and then I can let you go and I can take over for the rest of this. Talk me through, does Coursedog support single sign-on? How does single sign-on play in with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm sure all the attendees here are familiar with single sign-on. It's something that's very commonly used across educational institutions. And it's meant to make it really easy to sign on to the variety of tools that your institution uses, from your SIS to your email to your LMS to your scheduling tool. You'll use one sign-on. And so it's important for us to be able to integrate single sign-on because it makes it a lot easier for users to access our tool. So single sign-on comes in a variety of different flavors. The most commonly are SAML, CAS, and OpenID, where most educational institutions will be using the latter of those two, SAML or CAS. We support integrations with all three of the widely accepted common single sign-on protocols. And it's usually a very straightforward process, although we do like to set up a session with a member of your IT staff before and after the integration to help us do setup and testing. But basically, single sign-on is a system of trust. And your office, someone in your IT team has to go into your system and say, we trust the Coursedog system to send us a user sign-on request. And then in our system, we'll say, hey, we're going to accept a user sign-on request from coursedoguniversity.edu. A user goes into our site, they click log in, and then they're automatically redirected to a single sign-on page. They sign on with their normal credentials, and then they're redirected back into Coursedog. And the last thing we need is in all SSO responses, there's usually claims or fields that help us identify the right user to log in. And sometimes they're out-of-box pre-built default fields. Sometimes we might have to add a custom claim to say, hey, we might need the user ID or the user email. And this just helps us map the user in your SIS or your identity management system to the user in Coursedog. But beyond that, it's a very straightforward process. Once your system identifies Coursedog as an acceptable source, and we identify your institution as an acceptable place to send users to log in, then the system's set up. The only thing I'll add is that for any institutions using a federated single sign-on service, this includes Microsoft or Azure Identity, there might be a few additional steps in those softwares just because there's a little more built out to create a kind of custom third-party vendor object in those systems and then attach the Coursedog URL to that process. But that's something that we've worked with multiple institutions in the past, and we'll be absolutely right there with you going through those additional steps one by one.
That was technical, Nick, but I like the sound of Coursedog University. Nick, you're more than welcome to hop off. You can go to lunch or whatever your client call or whatever it is that you're doing. I can take over here.
Thank you, Justin. And thanks everyone for your time today.
Thanks, Nick. So I want to talk a little bit about, I know that we're getting pretty into the weeds here, so I'm going to quickly take a look at our questions. And then based on those questions, after those questions, I answer maybe a few questions, I'll be able to resume the presentation. So one question that just came through is, how do folks monitor the integration, or is there some type of way to really see how the integration is coming together? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. There is a way to do this, and I'll actually, I can load up an example of this right now. So each client on the Coursedog platform, and this is something that's actually been newly pushed for some clients, has access to an actual merge dashboard where they can see what items are being merged into the platform, where they can view merge reports to see whether or not each upload of the platform has been successful, and where they can see a merge health check. So this actually checks for each field. Are there discrepancies between the SIS? Are there problems? or is the integration working perfectly? Likewise, on this console, the school actually will have the ability to apply certain integration filters. So while this is something that we would normally set up, based on whatever we define in the data workbooks, if there's certain data that you want us to actually filter out, Coursedog does provide a front end that allows you to monitor what's being filtered out. So as a good example, a lot of institutions don't store necessarily all of their rooms in their SIS, and the rooms that they store in their SIS may have different types than the rooms that are stored inside of a third-party events or classroom scheduling platform. And so what we'll do is we'll filter out our gets so that the room type from the SIS is not overwriting the room type that perhaps we imported via a third-party CSV from an event or classroom scheduling platform. In turn, data filters are a way for us to make sure that we're getting the right data from your student information system or from CSVs or flat files for those of you that do it that way, and that we're pushing back the right information as well. Thank you for the awesome question. One other question that we're seeing is how Coursedog makes sure that the data that's coming through doesn't have errors, or how do we make sure that data is actually properly formatted, and to what extent that depends on Coursedog, what extent that depends on the client. Obviously, we expect you to take a look at your data at some point and confirm that it looks good. It's hard. And honestly, there's never been an integration where we haven't during UAT had to say, hey, let's take a look at this. Oh, we need to make X or Y adjustment. There's always a little bit of back and forth there to make sure that we're talking about the right things. But Coursedog does an extensive user acceptance testing process, and we will make sure that as that data comes in, it is as you requested. At the same time, there is still a burden on the client to verify that that data is correct. And we do give you a checklist of items that, hey, check sections. Is this here? Is this here? Is this here? And that makes sure that you can go down and say, yep, this looks good, this looks good, this looks good, so that everything is there and in place. Awesome. Cool. So the next thing that I wanted to touch on briefly is, I'm going to go back here. So we've talked about SIS and SSO methods. I want to talk a little bit about Go Live and client support. So one of the things that we do with all of our clients, even after Go Live, is we're pretty much willing to meet all the time. With maybe some other vendors, there's like the idea of consulting services, or I need a consultant to now come in and help me. With pretty much all of our clients right now, we do weekly meetings. We're continuing to improve the product. We're understanding their needs. We always will have quarterly business reviews, steering committee meetings, and you will have on the project, not just a dedicated project manager, but a dedicated technical implementation consultant. So this makes sure that if anything goes wrong, you have a dedicated named resource that you can reach out to. And you also have Coursedog's ticketing center. So Coursedog actually does have, I actually go in here and I go to my home, I go in here. Coursedog does have the ability for you after Go Live to submit tickets. And I got the sense when we first set up our ticketing system, I was like, oh, that's so impersonal, but we're really good about crafting thorough response to our tickets and making sure that you get the information. I hope I'm not sharing my password with anyone right now. And making sure that you get the information that you need answered by someone who knows your workflows well. So we also do have that ticketing system in place in order for you to get any of your requests or questions answered. Cool. That is most of what I wanted to cover. And then obviously there's training and going live. So, what normally happens once we have all of our data in the system, that's when Coursedog's functional testing process begins. For those of you that are clients, you do have access to dedicated onboarding materials that allow you to fully self-service the process of setting your platform up if you want. For most clients, they actually will work with our consultants to get advice on things like best practices, hey, what rules should we set up, or how do we want the optimizer to work, or what are best practices related to time blocks. That's an area where we are working to improve our documentation to have best practices, but obviously it's helpful to be able to talk to a human face-to-face. In general, we follow a train the trainer model. We'll usually come on campus for most clients that have that in their services package. And we will kind of train your super admins. Super admins then can train kind of the end users on how the platform looks. If you want to see a good example of how other institutions have done this, you could look up, I think BYU has an amazing help guide that details their Coursedog reference guide, and how this kind of looks, and what they did to with the customizations in their platform, what they passed to their departments. Another thing that's great here is Coursedog, we're launching in March, something called Coursedog University that enables clients to take fully guided courses to help set up the platform on their own and to understand everything in the platform. So for any of you that are current partners or incoming partners, we've got a university course type thing that's coming out. And last but not least, I mean, I think that a lot of the things that are in our platform are quite intuitive. We now have some in-app guided tutorials. Each item in the platform can have things like tooltips so that your end users know exactly what it is that you're talking about. And in general, I think given the modern user interface and user experience, we hear regularly from clients that the platform is pretty intuitive and that, for the most part, you should be able to figure it out pretty fast. So that's, in terms of that's kind of a little bit on the functional setup and the training side. I will quickly talk about product releases and continuous training. We do have bi-weekly webinars, training webinars that you're able to join, and bi-weekly product release webinars where you're able to see any product releases that are coming out. If anything is expected to impact your environment, we'll always give it to you in your development environment first, so that you can play around with it, confirm that it works well prior to us launching it to production. Especially for bigger customers, we usually will have those kind of weekly meetings where we'll say, hey, this is the adjustment. This is how it's going to impact your environment. We launched this course demand thing, and you might notice that X, Y, and Z is going to happen for your customers. We always make sure to be really clear about our communication so that things don't get pushed, that result in an inadvertent impact on your environment. That is most of what I wanted to cover right now. I'm going to answer a couple of questions that are coming in here. The first one is, this is a really interesting one. So someone asked, for those people that are switching off of a third-party platform to use Coursedog, and I'm just going to extrapolate this question to a little bit. Third-party platform might be you're scheduling directly in your SIS. Third-party platform might be you have a separate room or event scheduling tool. How might that actually impact the implementation or the integration? And it's a great question. So normally, if you have a third-party platform, if it owns certain fields or data types, we will then do a CSV batch upload of that data. And from then on, that data will be owned by Coursedog. For other data that might be owned by your SIS, that's where we're going to build that bi-directional integration and supplement the data that we got from your third-party platform with data that's coming in from the SIS. For folks that are coming over from third-party vendors, we do have we have done integrations with a lot of them before, and so we kind of have our own data workbook for that, where we can show you, hey, this is what a resource means there, and this is what it means here. This is what an organization or a customer means in this platform, and this is what it means in our platform. So that's an awesome question. Another thing that I'll note is we regularly, when we're switching clients off to try to minimize downtime, we usually like to be a lot more rigid in creating a waterfall model for our project. So we really say, okay, we need to get X, Y, or Z going by this date, because a lot of times, sometimes a school wants to switch off of their existing platform, or their contract's expiring or something, and so there really is a hard go live date. And in that case, we'll usually try to cut out all the extraneous stuff, like no preference forms, no like crazy dynamic invoicing. Like, let's just get you off of whatever you're on right now. And so that will usually work with, you'll work with one of our consultants to build your timeline kind of based on that. Awesome. Does anyone else have questions that they want to submit via the Q&A? I've got one more here. The last question that's coming through is just pertinent to kind of the process of, some people they're saying that, what if some people don't like it when it first launches? It's a terse question, but it's a really good question. So, we're upfront, change is disruption is probably going to make some faculty angry, right? That happens in every implementation. And change management can sometimes be the hardest part of implementing any platform. And I see, sorry, Lisa, I'll respond I'll respond with the Sandbox question in a second. My apologies. I saw another question come through that I didn't answer. But related to this change management, we really do try to equip you, especially for clients that are using multiple Coursedog products or that may be having a large project. We try to come there on campus to meet with the stakeholders, understand their needs. And there's a lot of built-in things into Coursedog, things like best practice instructor preference forms, best practice rules that you can copy from other institutions, and kind of customized templates that our customer success team will create for you to help deal with this change management process that are helpful. But one thing I will note is, I don't ever expect a school, when Coursedog first launches, to have all of its end users be very satisfied. What we regularly see, actually, we have industry-leading, incredibly high, I think it was like 60 NPS scores, which is a guide for Net Promoter Score, which basically means how likely are you to recommend the product, and that score is quite good. It means most people, almost everyone actually, would recommend Coursedog who bought the product or was the administrator. But we actually do find that end users, when the platform first launches, the NPS scores are much lower. And a huge part of the reason why is there wasn't adequate training, or there's a political conversation that needs to be had that wasn't had, or faculty just don't like disruption. But the good thing is that we find after about 4 to 5 months of using the platform, things turn around. So that's when, the buyer is not necessarily, the NPS scores are still high, but the buyer sometimes is like, well, we need to keep working, we want to work on X or Y or Z, and their NPS scores are still high, but there's sometimes more needs that they have related to the project. But end users then start to love the platform because they get comfortable with it, they like it. Moral of the story is change management's hard and necessary, and probably sometimes you just got to give them what's best for them. Another question we have here is, what's the Sandbox going to be like? Someone asks, is it something based on how we're looking at setting things up? Is it a sample of your own data, or just a canned data set that may or may not make sense given how we envision the system working? This is such a good question. And the real answer to that is that sometimes a client, we do, what we really do by default is we take a sample data set from a school that has a similar SIS system. So for example, if you're a Banner school, the fields will be customized to Banner. If it's PeopleSoft, it will be customized to PeopleSoft. And we populate that with fake data into that sandbox so that you can play around. Now, truth be told, unless you're in a very tight project timeline, we normally, when you get that sandbox, it's more for you playing around and starting to learn things. But until you have your data in the platform, you're totally right. It's really hard to set things up. How do I set a workflow that says, if the bio department submits this, go to X person. If the math division goes to Y person, it doesn't work because your data isn't in the platform, so you can't set up relevant workflows. So if you do want us to upload a CSV of that data so that you can test around in that sandbox of your data, we absolutely are able to do that. But more broadly, we usually advise that the limiting factors integration, get the data in from your SIS first, then set stuff up. Because otherwise, you're going to get all this training and you're going to do all this playing around. And then when the SIS comes in and wipes out all your stuff, boom, you're going to have to relearn pretty much everything. So let me know if that kind of answers your question. I'm more than happy to go more in depth if you're interested. Awesome. That is pretty much all that I wanted to cover for today. If there aren't any other questions, I'll wait 10, 20 seconds. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. My email is jwenig@coursedog.com, jwenig@coursedog.com. I'm more than happy to get on the phone with you to talk about your integration needs, talk about implementations, project management, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that I missed today that we didn't even go too in depth into, but thank you so much everyone for joining. Appreciate your time. Bye-bye.